Good evening. Thank you to all of you who are joining my weekly Periscopes with Kids Deserve It. Tonight I will be discussing Chapter 4 of Kids Deserve It. So if you want to go ahead and in the comments type where you're from, I'd love to know where some of our viewers are from today. So if you can just go ahead and tap that in the comments, that would be awesome. And we'll get started here in just a couple seconds after everybody gets an opportunity to join. California, Seattle, Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, lots of great places around. Hey, my mom is on here too. Katy, Texas. One of my really good friends is in Katy, Texas. That's awesome. Cassie, North Navasota. Well, my name is Todd Nesloni, and I am the co-author of Kids Deserve It, and this week we'll be talking about Chapter 4, Never Slam the Door. So I would love if you would swipe across the side and share this out on social media using Twitter, Facebook, however you want to share, so we can share this message with as many people as possible. This is one of the chapters that I feel most passionate about. It's not my favorite chapter, we haven't gotten there yet, but this is one of the chapters that I am extremely in love with and think that it's a really powerful message to hear. This chapter is called Never Slam the Door. Adam and I both wrote and shared stories in this chapter as well, like we did in many of the other chapters. But I kind of want to share with you some of my thoughts from this chapter as well, and just kind of share with you kind of what was our thinking behind some of this. That light behind me is getting on my nerves. There we go. Okay. So, we start the chapter by talking about how, as an educator, you know that every year we have that student. We have that student that just knows how to push our buttons, whether it's the good buttons or the bad ones, and they just seem to be someone that is always on our brain. We're always trying to figure out different ways to reach them, to work with them, to make sure that they get the best education possible. And one thing that I like to think about when I'm working with those kind of kids is that typically when a child is acting out or is not behaving the way we expect to, it's usually coming from a place of hurt. I work in a place now where I have a lot of kids that deal with a lot of different pain in their lives, and they bring that pain to school. I remember my first year as a principal where I'm at, and I remember a teacher coming to me, and she was crying within the first 3 weeks of school. And I asked her, I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she said, "Every single day that I show up, these kids ask me if I'm coming back tomorrow." She said, "I don't know why they keep asking me that. Why would I not come back the next day?" And through doing a little research, I found out that these kids had been through 4 or 5 teachers the year before, of teachers who just weren't sticking with them. And so they didn't believe the teacher was going to come back the next day. And it was kind of from that sense that it was like we have to constantly remind our kids of how important they are and how we're here for them and we're not going to leave you and we're going to stick this out no matter what. And one of the things that we talk about in this chapter too is that kids need to know they're loved unconditionally. It's not something we can just expect that they assume correctly, because they need to be told how much we care about them. They need to know that every day is a clean slate. They need to know that there's nothing they could do that would push us out of their lives, that we are here completely for them. One thing I always talk about is those kids need to know, and their parents need to know, that we care about them more than just a button, a chair, and a name on a page. That they mean so much more to us in our lives. And one thing that I think about, and I like using the analogy, before I get to that, one thing that I think about is, sometimes when we have kids that really irk us or really know how to push our buttons or really push us to the edge, we tend to act out as adults with anger or a consequence, or you're going to have to walk laps, or you're going to have to sit out at recess, or you're going to have lunch detention, or this like that. And I think so many times we forget the opportunity that we have to have a conversation. Regardless of the age, I feel like that's a really important thing for us to consider. I can think of a lot of instances over the last couple of years as a school principal of the simple fact of sitting down with a kid and talking to them has solved 75% of the problems right there. Because typically what you find out is that those kids are acting out because of something else that happened that has no relation to what just took place. And so they're angry about something that happened at home, or a friend said something, and they act out in a way that you wouldn't have expected, because those things come from a place of hurt. And there's been so many times where I've brought a kid into my office and just had that simple conversation with them, and they feel respected and they feel valued, that you're taking the time rather than just jumping all over them and having a consequence right away. Because many of them come from homes where parents just jump to yelling or screaming or consequences right away, and that doesn't really teach them anything. The other thing I think about is that sometimes the kid just needs to go for a walk. And there's been many times where I've just gone to a teacher's classroom when a kid's been having a rough day, and we just walk a lap around the school, or we go shoot some baskets on the basketball court, or we go to my office and we read a book together. Just taking that time to leave the situation for a moment, because what we forget about with kids, regardless of their age, a kindergartner or a senior, we forget that sometimes they need to be pulled out of that situation so that they can comprehend the situation. And so that's why I think it's so important that to not just jump to, well, you have this consequence right away. Well, you know, why don't we stop and figure out what the problem is? Because if we just jump right to a consequence all the way, it doesn't mean it's going to fix the problem if it's a long-lasting hurt that those kids are listening to. One of my favorite quotes from this chapter, and one that we chose to highlight in one of the blurbs, is, when you listen to a child, you give him back his voice. And that is one that I really want plastered on everything that I do, and a message that I want to continually remind myself is that so often our kids' voices feel drowned out by us adults who make all the decisions for them, and us adults who tell them how to behave and tell them what we expect and tell them all these things, that they feel like they've lost their voice. And I think it's so important for us to listen to them so we can give them back their voice. The other thing I think about is the story that I shared in the chapter. A woman named Erin Kress, who was an elementary teacher, I found out about something she did from Angela Myers, who shared it with me. And what she did was she wrote a letter to her students every single year. And she wrote a letter that just told them, you know what, I care about you. I know we haven't met, but it's going to be a great year. You get a clean slate, all these things. And when I read about that she did that, I thought, well, that's something as a teacher I want to do too. So I started sending letters out to my students my last 2 years in the classroom. And the letter said pretty much the same thing of, I can't wait to meet you. It's going to be the best year ever. We're going to work together to find your version of success. No matter what you've had in the past, when you come to my class, you get a clean slate. And we are going to make this the best year you have ever had at school. And I remember sending that to 75 of my students, because I had 75 at the time, and not having a student say a word. And Meet the Teacher Night, a couple of parents had said that they had gotten the letter and it meant a lot, but no kids said anything. And I remember the last day of school that year, I had a parent come and deliver a note to me, and she said, my son wrote you a letter. She said, I haven't read it, and he did not want to be here when we read it, but he wanted us to read it together. And we opened it up, and I remember us sitting there and just crying together as we read the letter together, because it was from a special education student who had never before passed a state exam or any of the other things. And by the grace of God, he passed everything that year that he was with my team. And the letter said, I just want to tell you, Mr. Neslony, how much the letter you sent to me at the beginning of the year meant to me. He said, because for the first time ever, my teacher did not refer to me as a special education student. He said, you wrote me a letter that said that we were going to work to find our success, that said I was important to you. And he said, nowhere in there did it have that label that I'd always been given. And it was such a powerful moment for me to have that reminder that sometimes the things that we do that we don't think make that big of an impact, we find out much later of the huge impact that they left. And as a principal now of a school, I've made it a priority of mine that every July I send out a letter to all 750 of my new students and telling them how much they mean to me, how great the year is going to be, and how much I can't wait to see them. And then I also challenge my teachers to do the same. But in addition to teachers, every member of our staff, instructional aides, campus secretary, librarian, it doesn't matter what their role is, we challenge them to write letters to students too, so that every student at our school gets a letter from the principal, gets a letter from their teacher, and potentially could get a letter from somebody else on staff. So we pull our entire school roster, people highlight names that they're going to send letters to, and I got to tell you, our Meet the Teacher Nights have just grown exponentially, and it's such a great feeling to see these kids walking in with these letters and these postcards they received telling them how special they were before their teacher had even met them. Imagine a kindergartner at home getting that letter telling them that they are loved, that their teacher can't wait to meet them. I don't know about you, but I don't know any kindergartner that wouldn't be so stoked to go and meet their teacher. And so I encourage you to also find time throughout the year to send those letters, because it doesn't have to just be a beginning of the year thing. You can do it throughout the entire year of just sending notes to those kids, or even to those kids' family members, letting them know how special they are to you. And then the other thing I wanted to make about this, or talk about this chapter, is that I like the analogy of a seed. And as educators, we get to plant those seeds in kids' lives. And especially elementary educators, we don't always get to watch the seed bloom. Some of us, it's our job to plant the seed. Some of us, it's our job to water the seed, and others ones, we get to weed around it and watch the seed grow. And as elementary educators, so often we don't get to see that growth because we have them when they're so little, and they don't come back to us sometimes till years later or never at all. But that doesn't mean that we can't stop investing in our kids' lives. That we have to know that we have to give them the right conditions to allow those seeds that we're planting to take root and grow into something strong, because we don't want our kids overtaken by the weeds of life and by the other things that will try to choke their dreams or choke their beliefs about themselves. And so we have to make sure that we're leaving that impact. The last thing I'll leave you with is the end of the chapter, where one of the quotes that we've highlighted is, kids want to know that they matter to you. And I think it's so important for us to realize that we have to tell them, just like I said earlier, how much they matter. Just like Angela Myers says, how much worth they have, how much value they have, how they don't have gifts that this world wants, they have gifts that this world needs. And it's so important. I love Angela Myers' You Matter Manifesto. You can Google it to get it, but we read it every single morning on the announcements so that we can talk, so we can have that thing. Because there's research that says when you repeat something to yourself over and over again, whether it's true or not, your brain begins to believe it. And so I make it a point to read that You Matter Manifesto every single morning on the announcements so that hopefully their brains really truly begin to believe that we do believe they have worth and value. Because there's so many of our kids that don't believe that. The last thing I will leave you with is make sure that as this year progresses, that you continue to show empathy, you continue to show forgiveness, and you continue to show patience. Building those relationships, in my belief, is the #1 job of an educator. You can never teach them academically if you're not building them up emotionally. And so it's super important that we take the time to get to know them, and that we take the time to listen to them when they make great choices and when they don't make great choices. Because truly, that's our job as educators, is to educate them along every path that they take. So I hope that you never close the door on a child and always give them another chance and a clean slate every day they come into your room. I hope you join our Kids Deserve It chat that starts here in just a couple minutes at 8 o'clock Central, where we'll be talking about this chapter with people from all over the world using the hashtag Kids Deserve It. Join me next week for my next Periscope over chapter, what are we on now for? Chapter 5. Yes, chapter 5. Make That Phone Call, which is a great chapter with a really great story from Adam and I of a time that he punked me pretending to be Ron Clark. Hope you guys have a great evening. If you've started school already, hope your school year's going off to a great start. And if you're starting soon, send out those letters and then welcome your kids back the best way possible. Have a great evening.